Hello, welcome everyone. We're going to get started in a few minutes here. All right. Well, in the interest of everyone's time, we're gonna get started here with a few introductions. You have found yourself in the Climate Strategies Workshop for Transportation. This is a second of our series. And we're really excited to have so many amazing minds in the room to really help us think about the ways in which we can reduce climate pollution and benefit communities in transportation. Next slide. This is, like I mentioned, this is the second of a series. Last week we had best practices for climate action planning. This was really kind of big picture thinking. What are some good strategic approaches to take into this work? We talked about, the importance of thinking about power and influence, the importance of centering frontline communities, and also kind of the intersectionality of all of these different topics. Today, we're focused on transportation, but as you can see, we have several other topics such as buildings and energies on May 21st, June 4th, waste and water, land use and natural and working lands on June 18th, and July 2nd is cross-cutting strategies. Those are things like workforce, education, anything that comes up as themes in these beginning workshops. We also hope to have a in-person community report back sometime this summer, maybe fall. And the second half of this meeting is reserved for our community task force, which we'll talk about in a minute. Next slide. So first hour is jam-packed. We're going to start with some intros. Then we're going to do a quick vote. Don't worry, this is not set in stone, but this is just to get a temperature of the room of the kinds of strategies we think might be important to our region. Then we're going to develop a shared understanding of transportation in central New Mexico and talk about some best practices that we should take going forward. Then our panelists are going to provide us really quick responses to what they've heard so far to help guide us in identifying strategies that are really implementable, but also, build off of our strengths from their expertise in the roles that they bring to the table. Then we're going to do our final vote, and then we're going to ideate what those top strategies will look like. We'll also have an opportunity for sharing other strategies as well. So if your top strategies were not selected, we will have a chance for you to ideate with us. And then the second hour, we'll be sharing it with our community task force. Anyone who's interested in staying longer, you're more than welcome. This is a really great group of individuals who are helping us center equity in our work. Next slide. Okay, a little bit about us. Next slide. This workshop series is brought to you by a climate pollution reduction grant. The city has received it on behalf of the central New Mexico region, which is that area outlined in red on the left. It's part of a national climate planning program, and our ultimate goal is to create a plan that's due to the EPA on December 1st. And it's super exciting stuff. Next slide. The reason why the city, one of the big reasons why the city received this grant is because we do have a history of doing climate work. Back in 2019, Mayor Keller established our office. We did a 2021 climate action plan, a greenhouse gas inventory. And really this work is meant to build off of that experience, make some tweaks and iterate and adjustments, but ultimately we're using this as an opportunity to update our 2021 climate action plan. So we're doing it in such a way that we want to allow other municipalities in this central New Mexico region to make use of this as well, because we don't have jurisdiction over this entire area, but we also see the value in using this mechanism to update our plan and hopefully yours, with the ultimate goal of having some kind of coordinated action for local governments and major institutions in this central New Mexico region. Next slide. Okay, this is project team. Like I mentioned, City of Albuquerque is leading this. This grant pays for my time to manage the funding. My direct supervisors and Simon, and we also have a really great team of experts in our office that we're collaborating closely with here. You'll hear a little bit later from Albert Lee. We also have Lotus and Planned and some really amazing folks that you'll get to know more as we get deeper into this work and our task force we mentioned earlier. Next slide. Okay, amazing task force members. You'll get to meet them later, hopefully. And we've got a powerhouse of a panelist group as well, which we'll be speaking to later in this meeting. Next slide. Okay, our goals today are to develop a shared understanding of our transportation system, to vote and select on the top climate mitigation strategies that benefit our communities, and to begin to ideate implementation examples. Next slide.
All right, Alice, I will take it from here for the next couple slides. So enough about us. We want to learn about you. Similar to what we did last time, we are using Poll Everywhere to get your immediate responses so that we can hear from everyone in the room. We recommend using the browser version of this so that you can type answers. We have a lot of open-ended answers, and it would be good for you to do them on the computer. If not, you can also use your cell phone by scanning this lovely code, QR code. We ask to keep yourself muted during this panel. There's quite a few people in the room, so we want to be respectful of the speakers at any time. If you have questions, post them in the chat. We have Dan monitoring the chat, and he will get back to you in time. If we can't answer your question during this meeting, we will follow up with an email. All right, so everybody get ready for this. Dan, I think you are also gonna put the link in the chat. So again, everyone, either use this join by web link here, pollev.com, MRWMLA 254, or scan the QR code. You can also do texting, which is, at least for me, a little more complicated. Some people might be more familiar with that. Anyway, so I hope we got everybody set up on here. All right, first warm-up question. We always ask this question because we are nosy and we want to see which chili makes the running this time. All right, and it looks like green always has a heads up. There's somebody that doesn't like chili in the room. Oh la la. I hope we convince that person, or can convince that person later on. If you haven't signed up here is the QR code. You can scan that or use the link that Dan put in the chat. Green chili is still making the race, followed by Christmas. All right, we'll go to the next slide. More about you. So what community groups, communities or groups do you associate with? So this again is a open-ended question, so you have to type it in. Also, if your answer does not come up on the screen, that doesn't mean it got lost or not recorded. If you press send or submit, it will, or you just type it in, it should be recorded. So even if it doesn't show up on the screen, because we have to move on. Awesome. So we have a UNM athlete here, a North Valley person, a Strong Town representative, LGBTQ representative. Awesome. So just put those in. We are trying to record people's affiliation just to see what the mix of stakeholders are on the call. And later on, we are also tying your answers back to the areas that you're from in order to have them geolocated. All right, I'm gonna go to the next question. What is your zip code? Again, just punch in your zip code so we can tie your answers later back to a area in the region. That again helps us later to ground the strategies and your suggestions or anything you're sharing with your area. All right, very good. And again, if you haven't been set up yet, scan the QR code or use this link that should be in the chat also, and then you can participate in the polling going forward. All right, I am gonna go to the next slide. How would you describe yourself? So are you representing a community, you're a community member or a policy expert or subject matter expert? We have a large panel today that work in the transportation field, but obviously there's other individuals here today as well that are representing certain fields, are experts in those fields. We also have our task force members here, and then we have the other option. Cool. Awesome. Well, we are very excited to have you all on the call. This was our warm up to get some basic information. Later on, we will have some more slides for you to participate. All right, Alice.
All right, this is the thing I was warning you about earlier. We're going to do a quick vote on the strategies that the EPA has highlighted as potential ideas for us to consider for this comprehensive climate action plan. This is by no means a final vote. We just want to get a sense of what people are thinking when it comes to your priorities for what should be included. So this is next slide. This is a multiple choice question. Please make sure you scroll down on your screen because there are several of them. You have, I believe, 5 choices. You can bank all of your preferences in one strategy if you really, really like one, for example, or you can spread them out across 5. So this gives us an idea of what folks are really interested in seeing. And we'll have a chance to review this again at the near the end of or halfway mark of this meeting. Okay, awesome. Looks like public transit, active transportation, building dense communities, pretty popular. Awesome. Very cool. All right. Well, with that, this is a great litmus test. Dan, if you can just take note of the top 5 strategies here, because we'll need them later on in our meeting, then we'll be good to go. All right, next slide. Okay, this is the part where we develop a shared understanding of our transportation system. What we've done is done a quick overview of what transportation means to us in this space. Our hope is that the participants and panelists and community task force members can take notes on the things that they agree with and the things that are missing. So those are the 2 polling questions that we'll go to after this next slide. It's just an idea. It's a way in which we can come at this work with an idea of things that we care about, and also it will help us shape some of the narrative of this section of the plan, so we can really capture what people think and feel about transportation in central New Mexico. Next slide. So transportation has to deal with moving our bodies and goods and services around. Here in New Mexico, we've got an incredible history of transportation networks from the Trail of the Ancients, El Camino, all the way through Route 66 and our international airport. Transportation has been heavily influenced by globalization and industry and technology. Like most North American cities, it's dominated by the single passenger vehicle. But there's also a lot of amazing things happening around technology as well through, rail systems and other modes of transportation. There's a lot of intersectionality with transportation, which makes it a really hard topic to actually tease out. There's a lot of land use connections because the more dense a community is, typically the easier it is to get around without a single passenger vehicle. There's a connection between housing and housing affordability that's really important, and also waste. So that comes that shows up in kind of the life cycle emissions of vehicles, as well as the cost it takes to build and maintain roads, as well as dealing with some of the materials for the vehicles themselves, whether they're EVs or not. And then climate, we are poised to look like Tucson, Arizona. So it's really important for us to look at heat and drought and how that impacts our ways of being, how fire and extreme storms can impact maybe our ability to use roadways. I know there are some places that experience flooding, for example, and what that means for communities in those spaces. And then lastly, for people, something that comes to mind is the safety of our families when it comes to getting from point A to point B. Transportation is one of also the biggest contributors to air quality issues. So that's another important factor. And then really our mobility and demographics. So as we see our population aging, we're going to see a huge change in how people can get around, and that's going to have a big impact on our systems as well. But we've got a lot of amazing things here in New Mexico. We've got the Rail Runner, which connects a lot of communities in central New Mexico. City of Albuquerque has zero fares. We've got a really neat electric vehicle car share program that we're piloting called Affordable Mobility Platform. We got ABQ Ride Connect, which is basically like Uber for some of the areas in the city that don't have a lot of transit options. And then we've got a lot of amazing bike trails. We're in the process of doing a network redesign. We are also doing some electric bus transition. The Sunport's doing carbon accreditation. But I know there's a lot of other amazing things that are going on, especially outside of the city of Albuquerque. So in this next slide, we're going to ask what you heard that you agreed with. So what are some of the things that you heard that that you think we should emphasize in our framing of this work?
And Alice, there's a few people that came on a little later. So if you haven't signed on to the Poll Everywhere, scan this QR code or punch in the pollev.com-mrwm254. It's also in the chat further up if you scroll up, and then you can participate in these questions.
So you are allowed to submit multiple responses to things like this as well. So if you feel the need to provide a few comments, you're more than welcome. If you have pressed entered and you haven't seen your response come through, it is there. The way that this system works, it just has a slow roll, so it allows people to read each of the different responses. So I'm going to move on to the next question in 10 seconds. Oh, all right, that's good.
Sorry, Alice.
It's okay, no worries.
Go back. Sorry.
So this next question is, what was missing? So what are some things that I did not mention that you think are really important to highlight in this work? Awesome. High reduction induced demand, protected bike lanes, single family zoning. Not sure what that acronym means, but we can look it up. Pedestrian safety, removing single passenger vehicles, access. Awesome. Mobility. Benches. Nice. Yeah, getting people out of their cars, interacting with the world in different ways.
And so the acronym was electric vehicle supply equipment and multifamily units.
Perfect. Thank you.
Electric. Yeah.
All right. And 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, press enter. All right, next slide, please. Okay, this is the section of the meeting where we talk about some best practices. So it by no means is going to dictate what we do here, but our office is engaged with a lot of different organizations that study this work at a national and international scale. So we thought it's important to provide everyone in this room some of the highlights that we've discovered in some of our early research in this process. So this will help tee us up for our panel discussion and then our final vote. So next slide, please. So there's a few organizations that we look to. Project Drawdown, Rocky Mountain Institute are two entities that we think highly of. And both of these organizations, when they talk about transportation, think about land use a lot, and the reduction of consumption. And I think those are some really important considerations going forward. But also, especially in this regional context, is like, how do we connect different communities that are outside of the city to each other? And that is in and of itself really challenging because we face funding barriers and we face human behavior barriers. So these are some just a few quotes that I think are good at framing this work. Next slide. This other resource, which I believe Dan will pop in the chat, is shockingly still available on the internet, but the United States Department of Transportation put together this really amazing article. Really, it's more of it's like 200 pages or something like that. But they created a summary of climate strategies that work in transportation. So you'll probably notice that some of these are not even included in that list that the EPA provided, but we wanted to share this with you to also understand, like, there are a variety of different options available to us. So this might be a space where in that other category that we're going to vote on later, we might want to uplift and prioritize as a group. So next slide, please. 700 pages. Thank you, Albert. The next thing we need to consider is, where does our climate pollution come from? And so earlier on in this work, one of our contractors, Lotus, they put together a really great greenhouse gas inventory for the central New Mexico region. So this is for the entire 4-county region, where our emissions are coming from. And as you can see, transportation is our biggest sector at 44%. Of that, on the right-hand side, you can see the breakdown of what that is. So a lot of it is on-road fossil fuels. So that's basically single passenger vehicles that we use to get to and from. It's buses, moving freight, etc. We also have off-road vehicles, and those are all things that are not found on your normal roadways. So that's maybe equipment at the airports that's on the ground. It's construction equipment, construction vehicles, that sort of stuff. We don't have a lot of control over itinerant aviation. So that's basically half of all airport travel that's coming into or out of our airports. And then railways, we don't have a lot of jurisdiction over there. So we're probably going to be looking at the on-road and the off-road vehicle use. And in this work, there's two general strategy models. One is to basically reduce vehicle miles traveled, which is basically reducing the amount that we use vehicles to get around. So that's where like active transportation falls in. That's where, getting more people to use the bus falls in. And then the second is reducing carbon intensity. So this basically means, of the transportation forms that we're using, how can we reduce the carbon intensity? And typically that means you moving away from internal combustion engines, so fossil fuel engines, and into something that's either electric or at least a more efficient form of fuel. Next slide. So this is another important graph that you'll be seeing in all of the upcoming strategy workshops. This is our business as usual projection. So this is basically looking at, okay, going forward without any further action, what are we looking at in terms of greenhouse gas pollution? So as you can see, there's a projected 27% decrease in transportation emissions based on our modeling. And that's partly because of some projected electric vehicle adoption, as well as the clean fuel standards that the state has. So this is a conservative estimate. But our goal ultimately is to find a way to bring that wedge on the far right-hand side of this graph, bring it down to zero. That's kind of best practices internationally to address climate change and sustainability, that sort of stuff, because of the global equity issue around around how climate change is really wreaking havoc on a few things. All right, next slide. So the last thing, and probably the most important thing that we need to consider in this work, is how do we do this work that doesn't exacerbate harm, but also benefits our most vulnerable communities. So this is just data from 2 federal mapping tools that we have access, or we got before they got taken down. But this is from most common to the least common in terms of our vulnerable census tracts. You can get a sense of what the data show are some of our vulnerabilities. So poverty is right up there at the top. Education, climate change, training and workforce, those are all really important things to be considering, as well as, fire, air quality, agricultural loss, et cetera, et cetera. So this is just a quick snapshot of what these mapping tools are showcasing, but it's by no means perfect. And that's part of the reason why we have our community task force, is to really help us make sure that we're centering these the needs of vulnerable communities in this work, and we're not making bad decisions. All right, next slide. So as we go forward in this next section, we thought it important to share some examples of the kinds of implementation examples that we're looking for. So we're going to vote on the top strategies, so on the left-hand side, so kind of these broad buckets, but then we're going to have more line item ideas of how we actually get this done. And our hope is that with all the brain power in this room and the experience you have working in these major institutions and in community, you'll be able to ideate with us what are some specific goals, some SMART goals that will take us where we want to go. So this is just an example of some things we can look at and some considerations that we're thinking of when we go into this space. All right, next slide. Oh, PCAP, great question. The PCAP is so this work is part of a nationwide planning effort, and the priority climate action plans were the first deliverable for a lot of these organizations. And in there, the EPA basically did this big summary of the kinds of strategies that were included in all those plans. And that far right-hand column indicates the frequency that those kinds of strategies were included in those plans. So you can see on the bottom, increased active transportation for our type of plan was very, very popular as a strategy in terms of frequency. Whereas like reducing freight emissions was only showed up 3 times, but doesn't mean that we can't adopt any of those practices. It's just an idea of thinking about what those look like. Okay, next slide. Okay, I think we have a few minutes. We're slightly ahead of time, which is amazing. This is where we're going to turn it over to our panelists. Albert Lee is going to join me. He is our transportation specialist at the city of Albuquerque. Albert, do you want to do a quick introduction of yourself before we hand it over to our panelists to answer our question?
Yeah, thank you, Alice. I'll be very brief for time consideration. Yeah, my name's Albert Lee. I work in the City of Albuquerque Sustainability Office. I'm the Sustainable Transportation Specialist and am happy to participate in this meeting. I work on various projects and try to collaborate with other city departments and community partners on active transportation, vehicle emissions reductions, public transit projects, anything that tries to promote and improve clean and green transportation in the city. But I wanted to transition to our panelists and get their perspective because they are very generous with their time this afternoon. So just wanted to get some feedback briefly in 1 or 2 minutes if each of the panelists can go ahead and think about, based on the initial vote about our transportation strategies, what type of advice and feedback would you give as far as how those strategies would impact climate emissions and reductions and ways to really move that forward. So I'll just open it up to all our panelists, and feel free to unmute yourself and put on your cameras. And if you could briefly in 1 or 2 minutes, just give us some of your feedback. Thanks.
Yeah, if you don't mind, maybe we can go in the order that's on the slide. So Tara, not to put you on the spot, but if you wouldn't mind kicking us off, that'll give us a few minutes, maybe save some time in the back and forth.
Okay, yeah, sure thing. So yeah, just responding to these strategies. I think it's a great top 5. I personally really strongly agree with all of them, and I'll talk a little bit about the active transportation strategy there. I agree with that, and having complete streets policies, different jurisdictions would help with increasing those options, and also improving safety and the comfort for those modes. So in one of my comments, I was talking about street trees earlier, so that kind of gets to the comfort, and that kind of addresses, that has multiple benefits. If you're providing more street trees, making it more comfortable and providing more shade, helping with reducing the heat island effect. Also, I think safe routes to schools efforts could really help increase active transportation, and I think maybe that could be something that we look into. There's a lot of trips that are taken to take children to school, so reducing those numbers of trips would help. And then, yeah, that goes along with the land use. So I think in the long term, if you do things now to help increase density, that will make the distances shorter, and that will help support active transportation modes. And yeah, and then just also want to add, maybe for to support EV charging, maybe looking into more solar development to help if there's more EV charging going on, to use that as a source of energy for that. And also, I think for electric bikes, other cities have had really good rebates for electric bikes, and if we could look into some of those
Spoiler alert, I think
opportunities.
PNM has one.
Okay, great. And then, yeah, and expanding those efforts, I think gets more electric bikes on the road and reduces those vehicle trips. And yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Sure.
All right, Kendra, I know you work closely with Tara, but do you have any additional comments you'd like to add on behalf of the Mid-Region Council of Governments?
Thank you very much for having us, and great session. Just wanted to probably seize this build dense communities and build housing and transit connected locations strategy. This is something that we talk about a lot through our community committees, that land use transportation connection. And I know you also have another workshop that emphasizes land use, but just to make the point that about 10 years ago, we did do a climate change scenario planning project, where one of the most effective measures that came out of that in terms of assisting with improving air quality and reducing or mitigating impacts related to climate change is this whole idea of zoning reform and densification, because of course what we ultimately want to do is reduce vehicle miles traveled, and those are dictated by land use. So where people live and where people work can increase or decrease the miles traveled on our roadway. And so things like transit-oriented development and the ability to have accessory dwelling units, even just gentle forms of increasing density. We're not really talking about, 8-story apartment complexes, although those in appropriate locations are also beneficial. Just kind of looking at activity centers, investing in key areas, and then having that be a means to reduce those miles and trips on our roadway as effective measures. Also just wanted to shout out to that idea of intersectionality and the importance of the co-benefits that can be achieved by doing these things that, help our environment, but they also help our quality of life because we don't spend as much time in our cars. Maybe we have more accessibility to affordable housing options, and a whole host of other benefits. So with that, I'll just leave it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kendra. All right, Richard from Bernalillo County. What wisdom do you have to share with us?
I don't know about wisdom, but hi, everybody. Thanks for having me here. And yeah, I think these 5 strategies are great. And, I think we've probably been most successful in doing complete streets and building our active transportation network. But that, as well as public transit, really depend on making those land use changes. And it's really important that we have a more compact area of where our development is located so that people can easily walk to nearby businesses or to employment, as well as bike ride or take the bus. So I think it all hinges on that land use in a lot of ways, making those changes. We're starting to do that in the county as well as the city with our centers and corridors strategy. We're in the county, we're working on a sector development plan that implements that centers and corridors policy. Also, I think if I can add another strategy we didn't talk about, it's called TDM, Transportation Demand Management. And so I think both Kendra and Tara could also agree with this, that we found that when more people have flex hours, or they're working from home, or they carpool to work, those kinds of things can make a real difference in reducing vehicle miles traveled. And we really saw that after people started working more remotely from home. So thank you.
Thank you, Richard, right on time. All right, Andrew.
Yeah, hi, this is Andrew DeGarmo. I'm principal planner with ABQ Ride, and I think I'm going to echo what has already been said, but these are a great set of 5, and also echoing that it's really important to think about the feedback loops between some of these. The building dense communities really helps us then increase active transportation and public transit use. The city does have some good connections in its zoning now between transit and land use entitlements. So the amount of density that people can build and the amount of parking that they are not required to put in are tied to transit service. And that parking piece, I think, is just a really big impediment to alternative transportation use, not just transit in Albuquerque. So the more we can reduce the amount of parking that's built, the better. And then I guess the only other thing that comes to mind is just, I think there's a great interaction between at least most of these and equity, because these are all improve people's access to transportation.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Andrew. I'm glad you brought up the piece around parking, and because that's another strong connection to land use going forward. All right, John.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. Good deal. Yeah, I think I would agree with most of the things that folks have already said. In terms of top advice for some of these strategies, I think I would focus on 3 main things. So the first one is education. At least in my experience, when you talk with folks, they wanted do the right thing. They want to do what's best for the environment. And so I think if we can help folks understand, the environmental impacts of what business as normal looks like, and then help them understand too that changing their behavior and maybe taking advantage of public transportation or active transportation or electric vehicles isn't necessarily as hard as they think it is, right? And so I think that that's a really critical component, is helping folks understand that these alternative modes of transportation, at least from a normal modern American lifestyle, we're not giving anything up, right? And so that's the first thing that I would say. I would say that the second thing is to keep in mind is that we need to figure out how to incentivize folks, right? So if we want them to change their behavior, I think all these are great things, right? But if you expand the public transportation services, how do we actually get folks? How do we incentivize them to actually use it, right? So that's the second thing. And then the third thing, and this is really specifically dedicated to EV charging infrastructure, because this is really what I spend most of my time working on, is to keep in mind that we want to deploy EV charging infrastructure where folks park their cars for long periods of time. And so we want to make sure that if we're developing and deploying EV charging infrastructure, that it's going to be used and useful, and that it's going into a location where people actually want to park their cars for 2 to 6 hours, right, depending on the level of charging that we're offering. So I think those are really primarily my top pieces of advice for the panel to keep in mind as they start thinking about how to pursue these strategies. So thank you, guys.
Awesome. Thank you so much, John. Okay, next up is Sharon.
Good morning. Thank you all for having me. I'm Sharon Cruz. I'm the NMDOT Climate Action Team Manager. And I kind of like to reiterate what John Williamson was just speaking on. I think these are all great top strategies, but I do think education is going to play a big role in implementing them. We do a lot of work with the Environment Department, and I think getting a consistent message out to show that we all are united in these efforts is really important. I also think, a lot of us are doing a lot of these efforts, so a lot of the data is already available. And I think it's very helpful if we start sharing this information with each other so we can make something that works for all of our entities throughout our state. But again, my section oversees a lot of the funding sources that pay for these operations. For example, we have the carbon reduction plan that, does subsidize a portion of Albuquerque Ride, the maintenance of NMRX, Albuquerque Ride. So I think we have a lot of, good opportunities, but I do think these opportunities go a lot further if we all work together and share data and, maximize these funding sources that we have.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sharon. Really appreciate you being here today.
No problem. And I also can share, we have a resilience improvement plan that was approved by FHWA for our Protect funding. And we also have a carbon reduction strategy that I can share with you guys. So you guys can look kind of the information that we utilize to come up with DOT strategies.
Awesome. That would be great.
And I have Gerald Lujan with me here. He officially starts with me on Monday, but I did want to invite him. He will be taking over the Protect funding and the resilience side of the NMDOT's initiatives. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Gerald Lujan.
Hey, Gerald.
She said, I'm starting to get on.
Gerald, do you have any thoughts for us from your past experience on how we should maybe move forward with these strategies, or for reducing pollution or benefiting communities in general?
I think these top 5 strategies are perfect. I was just telling Sharon the e-bikes is a big thing. I'm actually looking to invest in an e-bike now because I'm close to work. So I mean, all of them are definitely, top priority for us at the DOT. And so, expanding public transportation is a big thing. As you guys all know, I'm sure that we're trying to develop more EV charging infrastructure throughout the state of New Mexico. So that's going to be big too.
That is correct. We just completed our first phase of NEVI for those charging stations. We're currently keeping our fingers crossed that they release the funding for phase 2 of these initiatives. But, if you guys get on our website, there is a map where we've been locating all these all this charging infrastructure. And I think that's going to play a critical role in, pushing these incentives forward. Another thing, Gerald will be taking over this on Monday for the most part, is our resilience plan. And I think, really planning and identifying areas that, are at risk really help us, plan a little better and use funding for where it's really needed. and kind of address those issues as our climate changes and starts impacting our infrastructure throughout our state.
Amazing. All right, thank you both. All right, last but not least, Christopher.
Yeah, buenos tardes. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Christopher Ramirez with Together for Brothers and the Albuquerque Transit Riders Union. We want to, of course, lift up the incredible work that we and other community partners have been doing since 2018, which is the work around transit equity and zero fares, but want to lift up mobility justice. And I've heard a couple folks, Andrew, I appreciate you mentioning equity. We think that's one of the most important parts of when we think of a climate action plan for the city, Alice and others, that we want to see the communities most impacted getting dealt in. I want to, Dylan, in one more report that hasn't been mentioned yet, Smart Growth America, Dangerous by Design, shows that Albuquerque is the second most deadliest city for pedestrians in the country. The 1 mile stretch of Central Avenue between Louisiana and Wyoming is the most dangerous street in the country, more pedestrian deaths there than anywhere else. So I want to make sure we lift up something about Central Avenue between Louisiana and Wyoming. It is the highest concentration of low-income people, people of color, people with disabilities, and also the most transit-dependent neighborhood in the city that is the least mobile. We usually said we want to move away from walkability to mobility because mobility represents also people who are rolling, in wheelchairs or in walkers or parents and families with strollers, as well as folks that have other ways of being mobile other than with their feet. And so we want to see I appreciate the folks talking from the city and the county and the state, and I would love to have some investments from the federal level of how does that look like to have Americans with Disability Act compliant, ADA compliant sidewalks in that neighborhood, because that's not happening. More safe crossings in that neighborhood. And then use that as an example. By the way, we don't have to look far from that Louisiana and Wyoming stretch, that 1 mile stretch, to look at examples. 2 miles down the road in Nob Hill, all the things that we want to see, safe crossings, ADA compliant sidewalks, benches, pedestrian level street lights, trees. Tara, thank you for reminding us, trees make us safe and make it be able to walk. And last thing, trash cans, Alice. We need trash cans in communities so that we can keep communities safe and clean and healthy. And we want to work with transit to make sure we put back all the trash cans that were removed between Louisiana and Wyoming, for example, as one example.
Thank you so much, Christopher, and thank you so much to all of our panelists. I think you really help paint a broader picture of what we're looking to do and what our aspirations should maybe gear towards. So with that, I think we're going to turn it over to our final vote. And this is really to help us make use of the rest of our time together. So next slide, please.
Alice, I'm having a little bit of trouble. Give me 1 second.
No worries. So get ready on your phones, on your computers. We're going to do your final vote. Again, remember, you can do spread your 5 votes across different categories. You can put all 5 in one if you feel very strongly about it. But what this will do is it will frame for our last several minutes we have together. We're going to start ideating what those strategies will could maybe look like. So this is another litmus test. We're going to move on in 20 seconds.
And if you haven't, if you're not on the app, you can scan this here. The QR code and or go to Poll Everywhere MRWMLA 254 and then you can participate in this.
Okay. All right, do we have those top 5 noted? Looks like public transit, dense communities, micromobility, EV charging infrastructure. So we haven't changed all that much, which is kind of cool. Okay, we're going to move on to the next question. So for number 1, so we'll do public transit. So if you can pop those in there, then we'll have an idea of our sequence. So basically these next polling questions, we're going to start with our most popular to least popular, and we're going to ideate ways that we can actually move the needle. So this is where we want you to put your institution hat, your individual hat, your community member hat on to come up with smart strategies that we can maybe include in this work. So, and then we'll also have another one at the end where we can get some of those other items that we talked about, such as the importance of education and maybe ways in which organizations and institutions can do that, or maybe sharing data, that sort of stuff. So when we're ready to rock and roll, we'll start with increasing public transportation. So things that we want to consider are things like who are the key implementing agencies, what are some funding opportunities, what are maybe some things that are working well that we can expand off of, and then really start to dive into the details there.
Alice, I'm working on populating the slide. But I have not received the revised list, so I'm checking manually. So give me 1 second. Sorry about that. So we have runner building dense communities has 18%, just like increase active transportation, and then promote micromobility and develop EV charging. Okay, give me 1 second.
And do you mind just popping those in the chat as well, so we can reference them as we go through the different polling exercises? That'd be awesome.
Yes, will do. Dan, did you get the list put together?
Yes, putting them in the chat right now.
Awesome. Okay. 1 second. The challenges with doing all of this right here is that we have to update things. But we are almost there. 1 second. All right. And I'm going to reshare my screen if I can find it. All righty. There we are. Okay. I'm going back into presentation mode. Whew. Okay.
Perfect.
Alice.
All right. So like we said, here are top 5 strategies. They are now in the chat. But we want you to share your thoughts on how can we actually move the needle on improving or expanding these opportunities. So number 1, we have expand public transit. So any ideas you have around ways in which this can happen? Maybe it's yes, funding, maybe it's more bus drivers, maybe it's an education campaign, maybe it's partnering with big events to offer discounts if you ride the bus. Love to see that. Cool. Oh, integration with the Air Force Base. Nice. That's kind of fun. More CDL training. Yeah, frequency and longer operating hours, more bus drivers. Less sketchy. Nice. I took the bus for the first time last year and was pleasantly surprised. I'd always heard bad stories about it, but I'm really proud to say that, yeah, really was pleased with my experience. All right, signal priority for art. Interesting. That's innovative. Bus stops and shelters. Nice, especially with heat. That's particularly important in the summer times. Ooh, connection with cities and rural areas. Yeah, what does that look like? That was something that Rocky Mountain Institute encouraged us to look at. Okay, we're going to move on to the next question. We will have additional opportunities to help shape these ideas. So this strategy 2 is increase active transportation. So what are some ways, some ideas that you have that we can increase active transportation in central New Mexico? Nice. Sidewalks, protected bike lanes. Yeah, active transportation is biking, walking, roller skating, anything that has to do with your own, moving your own body to get to and from. Road diets. It's a fun term. Yeah, slowing traffic. Oh, we also mentioned trees earlier, having shaded walkways. Physical barriers between cars and cyclists, yeah. Maybe having cars parked in front of the bike lanes. Nice. How protected bike lanes work. Something that I've recently learned is how expensive a lot of this work is. And I know we've got some really amazing folks here at the city, Val, working on a lot of this work, a lot of this stuff. And yeah, it's incredible. Cool. Modal share targets. Okay, nice. This is like leaning into the data, creating smart strategies. That's cool. Bike storage. Nice. Okay, well, with that, folks, we're going to move on to the next question to make sure we have enough time for other strategies. So strategy number 3, building dense communities. So what are some ways, some ideas you have to help advance this strategy? So this could be zoning codes. This could be, maybe engagement with landowners, zoning reform. Nice. All local governments rezone to allow 3 or more residential units in all residential districts. Mixed use zoning, vacant lot infill. Ooh, removing all zoning restrictions. That's cool. Motel conversions, remove single family zoning. This is an important one when it comes to land use and also agricultural loss. I think something that came up in our original 2021 climate action plan was doing densification, but still trying to protect fertile agricultural land, which I thought was pretty cool. Innovative financing for the missing middle. The missing middle is housing. I will definitely dive into that in our buildings and energy topic in 2 weeks' time. Norwich was a subsidized dense development. Okay. Get businesses involved. Nice. Some industry engagement. Less parking zones. Okay. All right. Let's move on to number 4, which is promoting micro mobility. So micro mobility is basically the use of e-bikes, e-scooters, anything that's not quite active transportation, like tuk-tuks if you're in other places maybe, but things that aren't your standard passenger vehicle. We've seen some of this work happening through, maybe little transportation pods, which are kind of wild. Yeah, and a lot of other things that I don't know about. E-bikes, e-bike rebates, stations, community workshops. Ooh, employee incentives. That I like that because it's tying to an institution that has power and influence to provide to encourage employees to go to change their behavior. Tuk-tuks in Albuquerque, bring back bike share. Okay. Regarding affordability, good. Shared bike programs. Free e-bikes for low income. I do know P&M's e-bike rebate is pretty cool for low income folks. And I think they did a really good job of rolling that out. More ABQ Ride Connect, union drivers and electric vehicles, North Valley and South West Mesa. Yeah, the west side of the city is an interesting can of worms to consider when it comes to transportation. And also just the west to the east and what that congestion looks like. Great. Okay, with that, in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, let's go to the next one. All right, everyone. Last of our top 5, the next one will be our other category. So developing EV charging infrastructure. What are ways that we can move the needle to develop EV charging infrastructure? Think of like key implementers, ways to like specifically move this needle forward. Something that our office is really proud of is the affordable mobility platform, where we developed EV charging and 2 electric vehicles, actually, that's part of a car share. That has seemed to work really well. Ooh, working with gas stations, nice. And just to incentivize businesses and major employers to build them in their parking lots. Basic panel and electric upgrades. Cool. Charging stations at common sites, more fast chargers. I liked what some of our panelists were saying earlier around finding places where people are parking their cars for a few hours. I thought that's really good. I mean, also understanding that a lot of electric vehicle charging is happening at home, and maybe how can you incentivize that component? Oh, deploy with rail trail parking lots. Now that's combining a few things, or maybe the rail runner parking lots. Great, don't need more EV charging, need more electric public fleet, including city, county public schools, electric buses. Electric school buses is really neat because of the air quality considerations for kids as well. Okay, folks, we're going to move on to the last polling question in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay,
7.
This is our broad bucket. Anything else, any other ideas you have that you'd like to see included in this transportation plan? This is your moment to share that feedback. We will have other opportunities to engage with this, but this will really help guide our direction these next few months in drafting up our draft strategies and chapters for public review. Oh, can CABQ add gas tax to raise funds to pay for transition? That's cool. Yeah. Policies to minimize idling. Traffic demand management is actually a really fascinating topic. Complete streets mandate. Mandate without exceptions. Okay, cool. Reduce impermeable surfaces. That's also a neat one as when it comes to water and land use and our increased risk of flooding due to climate change. Shore plugins at truck shops. Okay, nice. That's great. Focus on the most impacted, transit-dependent communities. Bicycle garages are safe place, safe spaces. Awesome. All right, folks, that is the end of our time together. We are 4 minutes over. So let's move on. We're really excited about this workshop series. We hope you can join us on May 21st for Energy in Buildings. We'll be following the exact same format as this, and we'll be moving into our community task force meeting in this second hour. So next slide. We just wanted to flag that we will be doing another newsletter where we're going to provide all the notes and links to the recordings of these meetings. So if you know of anyone else who should be a part of this, I think getting them connected with our newsletter is a really great first step. But you will receive all of our meeting updates from that. So with that, that is the end of our first hour together. Thank you so much, everyone. Please feel free to stay on to listen in on the community task force component of this meeting, and we'll just kind of scream on. Okay, with that, Katrina, do you want to take it away?
Sure. All right. Thank you, everyone, for participating, and thank you to the task force for coming with us through the first hour and arriving at the task force portion of this meeting. we have an hour, so we have to fly through this again. This is our outline. We'll do some introductions. We will look at a slightly revised agenda, which kind of follows what we are doing here. We'll review the draft strategies from the first portion of the meeting to identify what some of the benefits are and/or drawbacks related to environmental justice and equity. Then we'll look at some project updates and equity touch points, and then talk about next steps and have some closing reflections. So introductions. Last meeting we had longer introductions. Today, in the interest of time, let's, if everybody could still show themselves on camera, say their name and their affiliation from the task force, and then we'll introduce our two special guests today that want to say a few things, and then we'll jump into the agenda. So I'll stop sharing so that we can see everyone, and then I'll just follow this list that I have on here and call everyone out. So I'm going to stop sharing.
Quick update,
All right.
Andy's unable to join us, and Jessica and Zia have asked, they're going to follow up with us later, so they're not here today.
Okay. Okay, cool. Let me just go find my bearings here. All right, so let's start with Alessandria.
Hey, I am actually, I'm heading to another meeting in my vehicle, so I have my camera off. But I'm Alejandria, and I am with Mexico Local Solutions. I just got on the task force. Thank you very much, everybody, for listening.
I'm so sorry to interrupt. It's a little hard to hear you, Alejandria. Are you able to speak a little closer to your microphone?
Oh, maybe we, yeah.
Sorry, I
Maybe
think
we-
my Bluetooth
Oh.
was kind of messed up. But Alejandria, New Mexico No Fault Solutions. I am actually heading to another meeting, just en route. So I'm in the car, but I just wanted to say hi and yeah, I'll pass it back. Sorry.
Awesome. Well, thank you for participating. All right, and Alice, you were saying Cassandra is not here?
Oh, no, Cassandra's here,
Sorry.
Jessica and Zia.
Okay, sorry. Okay, Cassandra, you're up.
Hi, I am here. Can you remind me exactly what you wanted us to introduce ourselves with? What our takeaways from the meeting?
Just for now, just your name and affiliation, and we'll have the next slide. We'll do a pull everywhere with some of the initial thoughts, just to be a little quicker.
Great. Yeah. So hi, everybody. I'm Cassie. I am a PhD biology student at the University of New Mexico, and I am here sort of representing the university community as well as hopefully using my ecological lens of the world to help inform decisions.
Awesome. Thank you, Cassandra. And Danielle.
Hi, everybody. I'm Danielle Garcia. I'm here representing Valencia County, but also the renewable energy industry, as I work in the private sector as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here. And Gina?
Hi, I'm Gina Brenya, and I am with the Delamar Neighborhood Association, which is in the North Valley of Albuquerque, and I work with the Center for Social Sustainable Systems as well. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for being here. And George? Or Jorge?
Jorge.
Jorge.
My name is
Sorry,
Jorge. It's okay.
Jorge.
I'm with the Center for Social Sustainable Systems. I'm glad to be here with all of you guys.
Awesome. Thank you, Jorge, for being here. All right, Julia. Julia?
I don't
If-
see her in the
Okay.
So let's move on.
Cool. Then move on. Krista.
Yeah, hi, good afternoon. My name is Krista Chico. I am here with, I work with the Native Professional Advancement Center as a job developer and work with the community and a lot of participants 18 and over. And so, yeah, I'm really excited to be a part of this. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Neil?
Not present.
Not present. Okay. Ryan? Ryan is, did you see him on the, I'm looking through, doesn't look like. Tanya?
My name's Tanya Mullen. I'm an international district resident with the South San Pedro Neighborhood Association. I am here also representing the Reina Luz Urban Ag Alleyway Project and the New Mexico Circular Sanitation.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And Xavier? Let me see. Xavier, are you on?
I don't see him.
Yeah. Okay. I guess that is everyone. If I forgot anyone, just let me know. I'll go back to our presentation and then we
have Yvette Trovar here.
Oh, yes.
So she's
so
one of
sorry.
our folks from the city who met some of our task force members in the onboarding. So Yvette, if you'd love to introduce yourself to the task force members, here you go.
Yeah, thank you, Alice. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Yvette Tobar, and I'm a field rep in the mayor's office. And I'm very happy to just be able to be present. It was fascinating listening to the first hour, and I look forward to all of these sessions. And I'm here to lend my support as needed. But I also love all of the effort and attention and energy around how we implement equity and how do we look at all of these particular items and topics through an equity lens. So that very much resonates for me. So thank you for your efforts.
Awesome. Thank you, Yvette. Sorry, I was ready to move on. And then our other guest, Brandy.
Brandy is unable to make it today. But
okay,
she was in our first meeting and she'll say hi next time.
Okay, that sounds perfect. So with that, we're ready to jump back into our agenda. So let me share my screen really quickly. And then we have a quick question for the task force. So we are using Poll Everywhere again, just to streamline and expedite answers and to hear from everyone in the room. So let me get back to here. So if you're not set up on Poll Everywhere yet, you can scan this code, QR code, and then respond with your phone, or you can also do this link or access the poll through the link pollev.com/MRWM254. And maybe Dan, could you put the link in the chat again? And so what's one thing you appreciate or found valuable in the first half of the meeting? So was there anything that stood out to you that you felt like was valuable, that informative, engagement was high? Yeah, we had at one point we had 74 people in the room, so that was awesome, and we gathered a lot of feedback from everyone. Lots of valuable information. Great to hear from the experts. High energy and engagement. A lot of good ideas. Yeah. Great diversity of insights from the panelists and attendees. Great input. And so all of the information that people shared, we will have, we will live in a spreadsheet, and we will use that to inform strategies going forward. So we really love everyone providing input. Love seeing people asking thoughtful questions, new and diverse ideas. Awesome. Appreciate the focus on equity. That gave us all hope. Yeah, no, it's great to see how a lot of departments and organizations are working in this space and thinking about reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So I'll move on so we already talked a little bit about wanting to change the agenda a tiny bit to have it a little more standardized. So going forward in the meetings, we'll just start with an introduction. We'll try to keep it to 5 minutes just because we want to kind of get to the heart of the meeting, and then talking about review of the strategies, project updates and equity touch points, next steps and closing reflections. And we would like to get your input if there's anything we are missing in these task force meetings. So if you have any thoughts on other items we should be covering. So I think the main hope we have is to get your input on the strategies as they are discussed in the meeting, but then also adding this project update and equity touch point to this meeting where you provide us input on our engagement strategies. So meetings that we either should be attending, strategies that you feel we should be employing, and then also people you feel we should be reaching out to. But if you have any thoughts on how we could improve these meetings, how we could add additional elements to the meetings, just let us know. You can either unmute yourself or put thoughts in the chat. And I'll move on to our meeting goal for today so that we have time. So clarify task force meeting structure. We already went over that. Uplift community values and priorities, and really doing that through looking at the strategies that were discussed, score strategies based on their ability to address root causes of environmental justice, and then prepare for the next workshop. All right, so we'll move right into our draft strategies. And so in general, what feedback, this jumped. What feedback do you have on the transportation strategies discussed and selected during the workshop? And we'll talk about each of the strategies in a second. But is there anything in general you would like to share? And I know we already had a little bit of a polling related to this, but is there anything related to the transportation strategies in specific, more globally, that we discussed earlier in the workshop? Would like to talk more about implementation? Yes, and so the next step will be figuring out how they can be implemented, and then we will also have certain criteria to make sure that they're serving frontline communities. They are addressing all of the other elements that this project is hoping to achieve. So the implementation is the most important piece of this, and that is what we are moving towards now. We need to increase our awareness of why carbon reduction doesn't always equal real emission reduction. True. Talk more about funding and access, more implementation of hybrid work schedule. A lot of EV discussion, but not about how we support that infrastructure, and public transportation is less damaging than replacing every fuel-based car to electric. That's a good point. Allow people to park bikes in safe spaces. Vacant businesses or office spaces need to see some public education on drivers being more responsible for bike safety. Totally. I've been almost hit a few times. Awesome. These are all great thoughts. More shift to rail-based infrastructure. And I think we have a really great foundation for that with the Rail Runner. All right. We'll go to the next. Refresh communities through updating motels and abandoned apartments could provide housing accessibility as well. Yeah, that is a good one too. Housing needs to be closer to where we have our main infrastructure, so that we can reduce vehicle miles traveled and also provide easy access to public transit. And then Yvette, you had a comment, is the acute need in an international district able to be specifically called out in the final document? I think we'll look into all of those comments.
I think our power here is sometimes in the framing of this work, like in the narrative of the plan, like that's where a lot of these comments from the community task force members and people in the meeting will be kind of summarized. But I think that there's a lot to be said around implementation, as the task force has already mentioned here. So, when we have these big broad buckets that we've selected, now our next step is to identify like what are those specific strategies that we're going to propose going forward. And some of those were shared and developed today, but a lot of other ones we're going to need to figure out what that looks like. So that's where our next round of community engagement will be, with those top 5. What are the things that we can do that really help us move the needle? Cool.
Yeah. Awesome. I'll move on to the next slide in a second, and then we'll look again at those 5 goals that were selected or that bubbled up to the top. And we'll look at how they relate to some of the environmental justice viewpoints or implementation we want to focus on. So I'll move on to the next slide, and I'll jump out of the presentation for a second. We have to plug these into this here.
Skip this slide, right? Because we oh wait, that was fast.
Yeah. I was prepared this time. All right. So, and maybe Dan, can you copy those into the chat? So expand public transit. Awesome, thank you. Increase active transportation, build denser, promote micromobility, and develop EV charging infrastructure. So we'll start with the strategy 1, expand public transit. And again, now we want you to rank or identify how well that strategy would be meeting, or to what extent does the strategy address environmental justice? 1, exacerbates. Yeah, it's not an easy one. Or 5, addresses the root cause, and it looks like we are split a little bit. And you're welcome to unmute yourself and speak to what your selection was and what your reasoning is behind. So anyone who chose 1 that it increases or it makes injustice worse, maybe you can explain what your thoughts were behind that.
And this comes from a strategy that San Francisco did in some of their climate planning work, is being able to rank, actually think as part of their budgetary process of like whether something exacerbates, so makes environmental injustice worse. So that would be something that maybe like providing tax rebates for high income families, like that wouldn't actually help anything to do with environmental justice, because it's typically those people that have a lot of money that are getting the benefits. So it's exacerbating those issues. Whereas something that addresses the root causes of environmental injustice might be something like, removing a Superfund site or rezoning to, so that communities have the same sort of access, that sort of stuff. And again, this is kind of where we're leaning on the task force to give us a good idea. And the hope here is that for each of these different strategies, we'll give them a score, and that will help us determine, generally speaking, like how we should be prioritizing this in the work. And our hope is that later on, we can do the same scoring for maybe all the individual implementation actions. So it gives us an idea of what we should be prioritizing as a community or as a region when it comes to addressing environmental injustice.
Is there anybody? Oh,
I just wanted to note you're also welcome to change your vote if you'd like to. In the voting on the bottom right, there's a little trash can that says undo vote. So you're welcome to change it if you would like.
Yeah. Cool. And if anybody wants to unmute themselves and comment on their choice, you're welcome to do that. Or raise your hand. It looks like Alejandria has raised.
Yes,
you
thank you.
Cool.
Can you all hear me now? I switched my my headphone. Okay, perfect.
Yeah, loud and clear.
Well, I just wanted to, raise some examples in Albuquerque, that we've heard is that, I guess I chose 3 because I don't feel like it creates injustice, but I do see a point in which it can. And I think of the example of, the way we fund even our own bus lines. We saw that ART and the Rapid Ride Transit, which already had quite a bit of, flexibility with time coming to the bus, but it takes away, or I don't know actually really how that was planned. I wasn't really, in the planning game at that time, but that 1, it took away from businesses, but 2, it created injustice in the way that that's funding that could have gone to other lines. We just have a east-west kind of bus line. And so I just wanted to denote that because I think that this is something a lot of folks have talked about, how do we fund the other lines? And if we're looking at public transportation, how are we doing it equitably and not just where the places or the hot spots like Nob Hill and tourist attractions really are? So check.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you for that comment. And I don't know whether anybody in the room has an answer or thought related to that. Otherwise, looks like we have D, so mostly addressing root cause as the highest vote, or
and we'll take the average of this for the overall score. So so your vote will still matter, but it's just a good way to visualize and try to quantify diverse opinions.
Yeah. Oh, so I'll move on to the next slide. And do let us know if you have any issues accessing this. We can maybe help you get you there. So then strategy number 2 was increase active transportation. So that would include biking, scooting, e-biking. And again, the question is, to what extent does the strategy address environmental justice? 1 is making it worse, or 5 is making it better. And if anyone has specific thoughts to this strategy, again, either raise your hand or just unmute yourself. All right. Anyone? Again, we'll look into implementation strategies later. Right now, it's us trying to gauge what your thoughts are in terms of how these align with making it more equitable, addressing environmental injustices.
Looks like we're more aligned on this one, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, there's a little less diversity. All right. Any thoughts? Otherwise, we'll move on to our next question, or strategy, better. All right. We'll move on. All right. This one was strategy number 3, build dense communities, build housing in transit connected locations. Again, 1 is making it worse, 5 is making it better. Wait. Oh, I'm so sorry. I just skipped through, and looks like this one, they are very aligned again, at least right now. Anyone wants to comment on picking C maybe? Would be interesting to hear what your thoughts are on how does this not really improving anything or making anything worse if this strategy was implemented? Danielle?
Yeah, I was just going to say for rural areas, there's not really a way to have walkable cities at this point. It's something that's definitely wanted and needed, but I think it's a very strategy that's heavily focused on urban ways rather than making sure that that balances with ag production, energy production, all things that are being fed into the Albuquerque metro.
That's a great point. Yeah, I think some of these strategies benefit the urban areas a little more.
Well, and maybe there's an opportunity to tease out like in the sub like examples of like, for example, we'd have like an urban strategy, which is more about densification in the urban core. But maybe in the rural communities, we can consider things like, okay, yeah, build dense communities around the rail runner station, you know, but also preserve agricultural lands as much as possible or something. So that's something that we can think about as a group to see if that can balance that urban rural split.
And it looks like Alexandria, you had your hand up too.
Alejandria.
Alejandria, it's okay. Yeah, I just wanted to add to the last comment that, you know, sometimes too, you know, I see, you know, even within like the municipal area, we do need stewards of the land, right? And I feel like if we encourage folks to move inward and we stop producing or we stop providing options to those like that are on the outer side that are maybe like the South Valley, Sandia Pueblo, like these other places, like we still need these folks who are taking care of the ecosystem. And if we're aiming for environmental justice, you know, I chose 3 because I think it is nuanced, right? Like this was the talking points 100% against the large housing development of Santolina, because sprawl is going to continue to push resources, right? The issues with right-of-ways, right? And I just wanted to add, you know, like how do we have a balancing act of folks who, you know, are rural, are land stewards, and also considering the ways, you know, we are looking at Albuquerque as the population grows. And so just wanted to denote like there needs to be a mix there, you know, and sometimes even problematically, I will say that, you know, sometimes the multi-use housing, it can, you know, like the Empire building downtown, there was a really great community garden at one point, and it was for the veterans, and then that green spot was taken out. Not really sure all the planning, and you know, I'm sure there's other business related pieces, but just bringing in some case studies for just, you know, information. So yeah, I think this one's very nuanced.
Awesome. That's a great comment. Anybody else thoughts on this? Anybody else going once? There's a few comments in the chat as well. William was saying, showing my bias, even if people are not living in Albuquerque proper, can't we build these small rural towns communities as small dense communities? That's a good thought. Densifying, I think, saves resources all around. But obviously we have a lot of existing infrastructure, so we'll also have to work with what we have.
I also think there's a really strong connection to housing here and the ability for people to own their own housing, right? So if you're building dense communities, if they're just rental units, then I think that's not really addressing any root causes of environmental injustice. Rather, it's might be exacerbating it because you're not allowing financial mobility for families. Albert, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, just one consideration I just wanted to bring up briefly is that often these multifamily development or more dense housing is built in areas obviously that have higher concentrations of transit and vehicle use, let's say like along Central, or if you look in other cities, they're built near like in lower priced land, like next to highways and things like that. And that unfortunately has pros and cons, that it's accessible to a lot of services and is nearby stores and things like that. But then if it's along a highly trafficked corridor, there is generally increased pollution right on the corridor if the housing is built there, instead of being maybe set back a block or two away from the highway or the arterial road and things like that. So that's just a consideration as far as exposure to like air pollution in these areas.
Yeah, especially for the interstates and noise as well, if you don't have good windows.
Yeah. And Alejandría also, and I'm so sorry that I'm keep butchering your name, also put a good point in the chat that water availability should be a major factor with this strategy. And I think, yeah, that's definitely something that should be considered for everything we do here, that water is another limiting factor in New Mexico. And it's one of our most valuable resources. Are there any other thoughts, comments, anyone? Otherwise, we'll move on to the next, to our fourth strategy, which was promoting micromobility, so bikes and e-scooters. All right, and again, we have 1 is making it worse, 5 is addressing the root causes or making it better. I also feel like this strategy is similar to increasing active transportation. But yeah, so micromobility, often there's talk about covering the last mile. So if you take the bus, but your house is not right on the bus stop, like how do you get from there to your home? All right. Anyone would like to share some thoughts on this strategy? It looks like everyone is, again, more aligned with it, enhancing or addressing the root cause of environmental injustice. Anyone wants to share thoughts on this? Christopher is posting reminder that microtransit like ABQ Ride Connect includes people of all abilities who cannot use bikes and scooters and use union drivers and electric vans. That's a good point. And we got somebody selected C. Do you want to share your thoughts behind that? Calling on.
I selected C. I can talk about it.
Okay, Cassandra.
I really like the scooters. They definitely help me get from the bus to campus or to the train, and I use them, but they do have a cost associated with it. And so when we're thinking about access, if there are ways to Yeah, just consider cost. You do have to have a phone to access them. You do have to have a credit card to access them, and not everybody might have access to that. So keeping that in mind. But
Yeah,
I do
that's
find
it.
them personally really useful.
Yeah, that's a great thought. And with like scooters, I feel like they also are very targeting one demographic. You have to be able to use these apps, and then you have to be an able body to use them. So I think there's some consideration
There might be
related
some
to that.
space for us to ideate ways that we can make it more accessible. Like, maybe one of the strategies is to encourage P&M to have an e-scooter rebate instead of an e-bike rebate or something. So, because e-bikes are really expensive, so rebates, it might be cost prohibitive to people. Whereas, like, you can get an e-scooter for a couple $100, and that might be a way that allows you, I don't know, just brainstorming. I think those are the kinds of ideas that we could maybe think of as a group, or brainstorm over the next few months.
Totally.
Yeah.
And my other suggestion is creating, offering some bike safety, some road safety activities or courses for people, because I know that can also be a barrier in Albuquerque, is learning to navigate the roads that are very car dominant.
Yeah. Yeah. No, our infrastructure definitely, we have some good multi-use trails, but there's a lot of gaps and they're not everywhere. And sidewalks are often not compliant. So yeah, there's infrastructure thoughts that go along with this. And then Alejandria, you're asking whether the city still makes the bike maps. I'm pretty sure they do.
We do.
Then yeah.
Yeah.
We can bring some to you.
Yeah, last I heard, they're releasing them every other year now. So, but they're constantly updating the map on the website, and they actually just refreshed the whole portion of the website, the bike portion of the website. So if you haven't had a chance to check that out, I'll throw a link in the chat. But there's a lot more information on there now, and it's much easier to decipher.
Awesome.
And I know Esperanza does do safety clinics as well. Matt, I don't know if you're on the call, but there's if you do like the safety course, you get a free bike. So there's cool projects that are happening in the city that people maybe aren't also aware of. So that could be tied into like an education campaign, or maybe replicated in other communities, right? Like, because again, this is not just a city plan, this is a regional one. And so how can we, like, I don't know, copy and paste like proven practices in other areas that it makes sense to.
Oh, there was also another comment from Alex that Denver provides the cost of an e-bike to low-income families, basically for free, and that might be a nice idea to explore as well. Any other thoughts before we move on to the next and last strategy, which was...
And we might need to expedite this because we've only got about 15 minutes left.
Yeah. So the last one, develop EV charging infrastructure. We'll jump to that one. And again, one is making it worse or increasing injustice, and 5, making it better. And I would like to hear anyone that selected A, maybe you can share your thoughts behind that.
Yeah, I can. It was me. I've worked in this industry for a while, and that EVs, while addressing some climate issues, they require individuals to buy them themselves. And there's no incentives for people of lower incomes, people on fixed incomes, to really participate in the EV space. Also, it requires you to have chargers, that is costs tied to it in your homes or even using it at workplaces, it still requires a set level of privilege that people, everyday New Mexicans particularly, whether it's their commuters or in urban areas, can't always be affordable and accessible to them. On the other side of that, infrastructure wise, we do not have the infrastructure in place to make sure that everybody has an EV in their house, or even just an EV in everybody's like place of business. We do not produce enough renewable energy currently to sustain that. And also EVs still come from our electric grid that's still 50% oil and gas operated. It's not 100% renewables right now. So those are my reasons.
Those are great points, Danielle. Anyone else want to share thoughts on their selection?
Hey, this is Tanya. I went ahead and selected number 1 also, and it's more about the sourcing of the quote unquote renewable energy in our world currently. You know, we're taking a lot of precious minerals out of poor countries and really impacting people who live on the other side of the planet in order to have our cute little clean infrastructure here. And I drive an electric car, so but you know, we do the same thing for solar and wind, and I think we need to address those on a broader scale than really how the scope of this task force can address.
Yeah.
An important point regardless, and
yeah,
a great opportunity for us to amplify those topics in this work, and another reason to maybe focus more on behavior change, even though it's really hard.
Anyone else? Any last thoughts on this?
I chose 3. Oh, I was just going to point out, I think about the environmental impact a lot about electric vehicles. And I myself am a little bit curmudgeonly about them, a little grumpy. But on the other hand, I also think providing the infrastructure encourages this behavioral change. And so there's the flip side of, you know, we're not in that perfect world yet, but are we preparing for a future that does have more access, more equitable practices? So just my thoughts.
Great point.
Maybe the way this task force can make solid recommendations is more around the implementation of EVs infrastructure. So maybe we're going to say, okay, to do this, we want to focus on these areas where we put EV infrastructure that makes sense, like maybe multifamily housing or something of that nature. So I think there's ways that in the details, maybe we can have this score a little higher, but ultimately there's going to be a variation between all the different strategies. And they don't all have to be 100%, but because but we want to boost everything as much as we can.
Cool. Anyone other thoughts you want to share before we move on? All right, I'll move on if this lets me. Cool. So we want to just talk a little bit about our upcoming engagement events. As we move through this project, there will be other events coming up. Our focus right now is on these strategy workshops, and they take a lot of manpower, and also we have seen really good participation. But so the question is really, is there any suggestions that you have to improve the format of this meeting? You can unmute yourself if you have thoughts or put them in the chat. We would really like to hear your opinion on what we can improve. And Alice, do you want to talk about the open office hours a little bit?
Yeah, so I think we learned a lot in our last meeting, not only in the first half, but the second half. We know that time is a big constraint. And we see these workshop series as kind of our best chance at getting let me back up. If we were to just send a survey out to people to say which strategies do you think are most important, it would only get, it doesn't allow us to talk about the nuances of our local context, but also around equity. So that's why we wanted to shape the first hour as kind of like, hey, let's funnel in together around some key context to a final vote. Because that gives us a much better gauge on people's true beliefs when they have a bigger picture of what transportation means in New Mexico. So with that, we're probably going to keep the first half of the meeting the same format going forward, kind of since we're gauging, probably we're going to have anywhere from 50 to 100 people in the future meetings as well. We just want to capture people's brain power as best we can in those sessions. What's a little bit more up in the air for me is this second hour. So we came up with this revised format today because we knew that our time with you is precious as well. We also saw how great the polling was in the first half and thought that kind of like transparent quantification of equity components of each measure could be really interesting to engage with and spark a conversation. So we think it could work well for a process going forward. But it's really about your guys's comments and insight around how can we do this better, not just in the strategies themselves, but also maybe in some of our engagement approach as well. So with that, we're going to hold off on doing any kind of community survey until after this workshop series. So it gives us a chance to see kind of how these themes develop and allows a little bit more time for task force members. If you're interested in engaging more, we can start workshopping that together in maybe the open office hours. Same with the strategy decision-making framework. That's a living framework that myself and a colleague of mine, Sandra, came up to think of like key ways that we can start to rank and prioritize things. But ultimately, the work that we did today is really setting those top strategies. So those top strategies will be included in the plan no matter what, but what those details are to be determined. And so that's the work that we still need to do going forward. And ideally, the more detailed feedback we get from you and from other participants in this meeting will make that turnaround time faster. So some of the things that came through in the polling exercises are really good. It's like, oh, like have like the city of Albuquerque do this specific thing with this specific policy lever. Like that's awesome. We could almost take that verbatim and put it into the plan. Some of the other ones, we're going to have to be a little bit more creative. So I'm hoping that this is a nice addition. And so from this first question into the second question, I put out a hold for like open or optional office hours just for the community task force members. And so I guess my very specific question to this group is there maybe a better time that I could have it at? So, and again, you don't have to do it, but I want there to be an opportunity for anyone to dive deeper into the weeds if they'd like to. But then we reserve this time for kind of this conversational kind of equity focus. I'm going to assume silence is good.
Yep.
Wednesdays. Okay. Wednesdays might be a little tough, but maybe every other Wednesday, I could do it in the same time as like the 12:30 to 1:30. So in between the different strategy sessions, just like a 1 hour calendar hold, because we know most of the task force members are available that time every second Wednesday anyways. So I think that's a really great suggestion. Can I get like a quick like thumbs up icon if that could work for you? Again, these are optional, but just want to have it as a possibility. Okay, up for Alejandra, Cassandra, Krista, Danielle, obviously, Tanya, Gina, and Jorge. what are your thoughts on an optional Wednesday office hour from 12:30 to 1:30? Thumbs up from Gina. Okay, Tanya and Jorge, I'm gonna, not great for me. Okay, yes, I can accommodate. So you've probably noticed in most of my email signatures, there's a link that says book time with me. So that's another way to get a spot on my calendar if you want to do a one-on-one. So okay, on to the next bullet point, meeting summary. So can I pass it back to you, Katrina?
Yeah. So we are working on a summary of all the feedback we received during our last meeting. So all of the polling we did, we have quantified. There is, through this tool we are using, we can export little graphs. So we will be sharing that out so you can see what the summary of all the feedback was. We will do that for the last meeting and we'll share that out, and we'll do that for this meeting and share that out. We also will have this information available in Excel so we can code it and better understand what the general thoughts were, what people were suggesting, and then utilize that later to inform the strategies going forward. So that is exciting, and keep an eye out for that. And then I think our last question is to see whether you have any thoughts on anyone else we should be inviting to these workshops to either just participate or be a panel. We have the buildings and energy coming up. And then let me see, jump to the next slide. I think we have waste and water and then land use. So if you have any additional individuals that you feel we should be reaching out to, let us know. The more perspectives and expertise is participating, the better the outcome.
And we're really excited that as Albert helped with this presentation today, for the next one, I'm working more closely with Anne, and then Sandra is going to be spearheading the waste and water one. So we have folks that are pulling in panelists already. So we're just hoping that this community task force can also help make sure those community members who are engaged with the space are also feel welcome. So we want to empower you to, if you feel like it, we'd love for you to invite folks from your network that you think should be here. And then we only have 2 minutes left. So just wanted to highlight that we do have some presentations coming up on Tuesday. I believe it's not quite confirmed yet, but I believe Mayor Keller is going to do a recommitting to environmental justice thing. I believe I'm going to be a panelist there. If I had to guess the location, I'd guess the Indian Pueblo Cultural Center. But if I get additional information there, you're more than welcome to attend. Tuesdays during the same time, there's this PNM Vulnerable Communities breakfast, and United Way is hosting this time. But we did a vulnerability mapping project with them, and so this is basically entities who serve some of our most acute frontline communities. So these are folks that are experiencing homelessness or maybe at risk of losing housing. So these are organizations that are one step removed. So it's like United Way, Roadrunner Food Bank, a lot of case management organizations. So we did this really amazing asset mapping exercise to feed into our frontline community knowledge and understanding. So we're just giving a short report back that will be recorded, but you're welcome to attend that. It's at United Way. Yeah, pretty fun. And then we will be, if you can think of in the next few weeks about what summer events we should be attending to get the word out. We do have on the docket to do the state fair and all the county fairs. But that we'll have to get to that a little bit later. And then let's just scream through these last 2 slides, Katrina. I think pretty much wrapped up.
Yeah.
So for all the new task force members, you have a little bit of catching up to do, but important things to do is make sure you review the 2021 Climate Action Plan, the EPA's Comprehensive Climate Action Plan outline. This is just like where we're coming from the city perspective and where we need to go for what the EPA requires. But this video, this greenhouse gas inventory overview webinar, that's pretty important. So if you have to choose one thing, I think that would be the one thing to do for sure. All these other ones are super important as well. But for everyone coming up for next time, the lit review, again, looking at those buildings and energy and central New Mexico communities. That's really great. And just getting an idea of what strategies the EPA has. And I'll include all the links to this in our follow-up email. But I think that's it for action items. And then we'll see you all on the 21st.
Cool.
Have a
All
great
right.
day.
Thank you everyone for participating and for your great thoughts. We really appreciate you providing input and spending this time with us. So yeah, we hope to see you on the 21st.
Thank you. Have a good day.
You too.
Bye everyone.